Good afternoon, welcome along to Training Tuesday. Hopefully you can hear us all right. This is a completely live session as always with Training Tuesday. Last week was with you live from Barcelona. Now, for the observant ones, my apologies, and I know there's a few people, I think Bill, you were waiting for this as well. There's a few people that were expecting us to do a Media Master introduction today. I'm afraid we have pushed it back to next week. It's not gone forever, don't worry. So today we're going to be focusing on the power of pallets today is our session, and next week will be Media Master week. There's a very good reason for that. We were hoping to have had the Media Master first beta released by this session when we planned it back in January. As it happens, we are now expecting to release Media Master 26, the first beta tomorrow, all being well. So watch this space, you heard it here first. Media Master 26 beta is coming soon. Watch this space tomorrow. Next week's Training Tuesday, and in fact the next 3 after that are all going to be focused on Media Master. So apologies in advance, it's not Media Master today, it's looking at Magic Q today and the power of pallets, but rest assured it is coming soon, and you never know, maybe you pick something up about Magic Q you never knew before in this session. As always, it is a live session, so we are streaming it live from Southampton, YouTube and Facebook. If you do have any questions, please do post them up in the chat. Would love to hear them and love to answer them as we get going as well. And also sometimes happy to go off on a bit of a tangent as well. So let's dive in and take a look at my Magic Q here. Hopefully you can see my screen here. I'm running our standard Chauvet demo show here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about pallets in this show. Yes, I'm sure you've all used pallets before, many times in different uses, but we're going to run through a couple of uses in the session today. Now, just to go through my setup a little bit here, if I go to my setup window and I go to View Settings and Queue Storage, I am in Prefer Group Queues mode here, and I'm also going to turn on Auto Create Default Pallets as well. Now, you have 5 options here. It's off by default. Actually it's not, our default is IPCB as it tells me here, but in the Chauvet demo show file, because it's a slightly older show, it's off by default in the Chauvet demo show file. IPCB, intensity, position, color, beam, and you've got various different iterations: intensity and color, intensity, position and color, or intensity, position, color and beam. So I'm going to turn that on, and it means I'm going to get default pallets by default. What does that actually mean in reality? And now I've got group queues on and default pallets on. Well, if I go and select a group here, let's say group 4, which is my spots here, and I go and position them up on the back wall there, I'm going to go and record a color palette. So these are CMY mixed fixtures here. So I'm going to go and mix myself a color. Let's put some yellow in and a bit of magenta, and I'm going to get myself a bit of a red color here, like so, and I'm going to go and store that as a palette there. I'm now going to drop the yellow out, and I'm going to put some cyan in and give myself a bit of a blue colour, and I'm going to go and store myself a palette here. Now, of course, we get an icon that shows us the colour that we've just mixed there. Great, that's handy. And if you look in the top right corner here, it will say C. It also says CXY. C for colour, it has colour information there. Now, one thing as I do trainings that people don't always get obviously is when you record a palette, by default, we only record the information that's relevant to that palette set. So if I look in my programmer, I located that fixture. It's got dimmer, pan, tilt, strobe, etc. All the beam information and color, and all the other beam attributes are in my programmer. Yet when I record a color palette, it only takes the color information by default. We mask out anything that's not related to color. Now the first step, so you're aware, as we normally say in training, all the good stuff's on the shift. If I do a shift record, you can now choose the attributes you want to be in a palette. You can either do quick shortcuts by saying, okay, intensity, position, color and beam, give me all attributes to that head. You'll notice some things are grayed out. Well, this head doesn't have the grayed out attributes. This head doesn't have framing shutters. It doesn't use all the attributes. It doesn't have white, doesn't have amber. So it grays those out. But it will allow me to record them over there. Or if I toggle these off, I can go in and I can pick the attributes I want. I can say take CMY and take pan and tilt. Close the options on the top right here and go and record a palette, and you can see this one here is PCL XY. P for position, C for color, L for link, and XY information. Now, linked pallets, remind me about that. I'm going to come back to that a bit later on. But if you see that L, it's got a link, which means essentially a palette can link back to another palette. Beware of that, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So you can see I've got these 2 color palettes here which work as I expect between my red and my blue. XY, what does that mean? Well, if I go and view the palette, when I've turned on default palettes, you can see we have up here, it says default and it gives me some color data here. Most importantly though, if you look at the top here, it now says CIE X and Y. What it's doing is analysing that colour, so the mix I've made for that colour, and it's creating an XY value. Now, the best bit about a default palette is that I can now apply that to any fixtures. So I could apply that default palette to something else. I could apply it to maybe my LEDs, or maybe if I change the fixtures, and what it will do is it will look at the XY value rather than the values here and say, instead of just using that or inverting it if it's RGB, look at the XY value and use that to make the colour. So in theory, if I was to then add say my profiles to this palette as well, and tell it to copy it, I can have them do exactly the same colour. Okay, in fact, if I expand my palettes across all heads, so if I come along here in my setup window and I go and find my expand palettes option here, I forget where it is in a live session here, expand palettes, here you go, expand heads in palettes, and I can say yes, all heads IP, in fact let's not do all heads IPCB, let's do all heads colour and beam. If I do that, what I should find is if I take my spots and my profiles and locate them, and I come down to my default palette here and select it, I get the same colour on all of those, and in reality I should have the same colour as well. If I view the palette, you'll see that the value used would be slightly different. Now of course I've picked two heads from the same manufacturer, and I know they have the same, well, it's the CMY, it's the same flags inside it. But if I was to use something like an RGB or whatever, and look here, I would see some different values in here now. Not the best example using CMY fixtures, but you get the idea there. Of course, with palettes, let's come back to a linked palette then. So you saw when I recorded a couple of palettes here, I had this L here, and L means you have a link to another palette. So much like I can have a palette linked to a queue, you can also have a palette linked to a palette. Let me talk that through quickly. So if I grab my spots and I locate them and I go to beam and I go and say, okay, find an empty beam palette somewhere down here, and let's go for something like beam 200, be easy for me to find later. I chuck a gobo in, I store a palette, I select that palette and I store a queue, and I go and run that queue. Well, if I go and look at the queue, you can see if I view the queue, the shutter, the iris, etc., the beam attributes are linked to beam palette 200 because I located. Okay? And if I was to change a value, so if I don't activate that queue, but I go here and I select my spots and I locate them again, and I come to my beam window and I find beam palette 200, the one I just recorded, and I put a different gobo in this time, and let's change my zoom, okay, there, and let's start them strobing just so you really can see there's been a change, and I update that palette, yes, and I go and rerun that queue. You can see, of course, the queue's updated because the queue is referencing beam palette 200, and I changed the value in there. Now, linked palettes then, why and what can I use a linked palette for? Well, my usual use case is exactly that, is for beams. So my case would be maybe for focus. So if I grab my spots here, and I'm going to turn them on, full, enter. Now you notice I didn't locate them here. In fact, I'm going to locate because I want to just default things back on again. But I'm now going to store that as a queue here, just for me having my lights on and a default here. I'm going to go to beam here, clear programmer. You can see programmer clear. I'm going to go to beam, and I'm going to pick a gobo. In fact, let's position the light so we can actually see the gobo on the back wall. There we go. I'm going to go back to beam here. I'm going to pick a gobo. Let's say this breakup here. Great, so I've got myself a gobo there, and nothing else is in the programmer at the moment. Okay, so if I was to store a palette, it would just have that gobo in. Now, if I clear this back off again a second, take my spots, put them on the back wall again. I should have put that in the position on the queue. This time, I'm going to take some focus. I'm going to set my focus to 255. Okay, remember that. I've set focus to 255. That's the only thing in the programmer, apart from, of course, tilt, but I don't care about that because it's a beam palette. So when I record a beam palette, it's only going to take the beam information because I haven't pressed locate. So this palette has only got focus in. So I'm going to call this my focus palette. Okay, so I've got my focus palette recorded, and I'm going to select it, and I'm now going to drop a gobo in. And if I look in my programmer, you can see, if I look in the programmer here, focus is linked to the focus palette and gobo is set to gobo 3. It hasn't got the dot in the bottom left corner, meaning it's not linked to a palette. So if I now go back to group position color beam here, and I store a palette, you'll see it now says BL, beam link. And if I view the palette, you can see that focus is linked to my focus palette, and the gobo is gobo 3. Great, okay, so I'm now going to go and do a repeat of that. So I've just cleared my programmer. I'm going to grab my spots again, let's locate them, let's tilt them up. Whoop, there we go. I'm now going to go down here, I'm going to pick my focus palette here, and I'm going to put a different gobo in, say that one, and I'm going to store that there, and it's going to be beam link again because I selected the beam palette with my focus in. So if you remember, and I could repeat that on and on, if you remember, I'm going to move that position of my spots up here because otherwise I'm going to keep forgetting that I've got that. So let's just shift record, merge into there, clear that off so my spots stay there, much better. But if I come back here now and I grab my focus palette again and I change my gobo again, let's say this time to this gobo, and I store that here, it's going to be a beam link as well, and I view the palette, you can see it's linked back to the focus. Now if you remember, that focus palette, if I come back here, has a value of 255 in it at the moment. So if I was to clear the programmer again, grab the spots, and I come and pick one of my gobos down here, let's say pick my second gobo, that one here, let's clear up a queue, and I store that as a queue there, view the queue, you can see it's got only a reference to beam palette 177 in this queue here, so everything beam is linked to beam 177, as I would hopefully expect. But if I go and look at beam palette 177 down here and view it, you'll see that the focus value is linked back to focus. So what that means now is, let's say I'm moving that show from venue to venue, and one day, the truss trim height is at, I don't know, 4 meters or something, and the next day it goes up to 6 meters or something there. I need to change my focus. Well, rather than having me update all of my gobo pallets, which are linked in queues, the gobo pallets have a link themselves to that focus palette here. Now I need to be careful about the attribute I'm going to put into that focus palette. So if I clear my programmer, grab my spots here, and just to make an obvious change, I'm going to set focus from 255. So you can see it was at 255 in the palette. I'm going to set it to 0, and I'm going to store it into that palette here, yes. And now automatically any queue which is referencing these pallets has been updated because it references the focus, and I bring that on. Of course I have to bring it on with this as well because I did it the way I did, and I view the queue, and if I go to my advanced view and view the value, you can see the focus value is now 0 and not 255. So link pallets can also link to a pallet itself. Now that could also be bloody dangerous as well. Because suddenly, like I have in colour, for me personally, I probably never want a linked colour palette. Why would I want a linked colour palette by default? What I'm going to end up doing is changing one palette and it changes the colour of another palette. So for me, I probably never want a linked colour palette. So when you're in any palette window, you see there's a button at the top here that says Unlink Palette. And always all the good stuff's under Shift. Hold the Shift key down and it changes to Unlink All Palette. I click that and it only unlinks that of the current palette set you're in. So you can see that L disappeared, but if I come to my beam window here, I still have my linked palettes here. But now I'm in the beam window, if I hold Shift down, you can see link, unlink, changes to Unlink All Palette, and I can unlink and make them hard values. It pulls the value in that it has at that time into that palette. It doesn't get rid of them. Right, what have we got in questions? Just keeping an eye on teams there. Hi Badru, you've got an MQ500M Plus. Perfect, I saw the picture. Mr. 500M Plus now. Tommy, what's going on there? Hoping to have a desk to sharp here sometime in the future. Yes, Tommy, watch this space. Looks fairly quiet on the chat and YouTube at the moment. Yeah, anyway, right, let me dive into something else while I'm talking about pallets. We're actually going to go across the options and along the top here. The other one I'm going to look at is expanding pallets, expand pallets. So here's an example then. I'm going to turn off default pallets quickly and expanding pallets just to show you this particular example. So I've turned that off here. I'm going to go and grab my RGBs, which are my Nexus panels here. They're RGBs. If I grab the group of them and locate them, you can see the panels at the back here. And if I go and store a pallet of these, you can see these are RGB fixtures. So if I go and make a yellow color here and I store that there, and let's make a magenta color there and we'll store that here. As we'd expect when I view the palette, it's got red, green, blue in that palette. Now let's say I was to exchange or morph these panels So I'm going to go and take my nexuses. All right, bear with me a little bit because it's going to change the show rather a lot here. But I'm going to go to choose head. I'm going to go and pick Show Pro. And I'm going to go, let's swap the panels for Innovation Rev F3 Fresnel. Why? But let's use that as an example. I'm going to go in 18 channel mode. And I'm now going to go and I'm going to select my nexuses here. And I'm going to morph them into Rev F3 Fresnels. Why would I do that? Well, just for the example here. Clearly I wouldn't in this show here, but there you go. So now let's take a look and see what's happened. The Nexus panels have been morphed into Fresnels. And if I go down and look at my palette here, the palette is yellow and magenta. And if I view the palette, it has RGB in. Now, cool, that works, doesn't it? Now, before I'd morph that, what about if I'd stored some pallets? You can do it after, but in my case here, I've got a pallet. Let's go clear that off a second. Let's get rid of the spots. No, I don't want to do that. Let's go and grab my new nexuses, which are now, of course, Fresnels. But just to give you an example, it will come clear in a moment. So I had one cue which was yellow there, one cue which was magenta there, and I'm going to store that here. Now, if I go and view the cue, you'll see that cyan, magenta, yellow is linked, or it's actually RGB, is linked to the palette. You've got a little dot in the corner there. When you see the little dot in the left corner, it tells me it's linked to a palette. But amber and lime are not. So now I'm going to come and I'm going to update my palette. So I'm going to go, okay, take my nexuses here, which are my Fresnels, and I'm going to go through and go, okay, well, I was updating the palette. This one here, actually, I would like to take out the red, I'd like to take out the green, and I'd like to take out the mint, like so, and I want it to be more of a sort of an amber using the amber channel here, and I'm going to store that as my palette here, yes, and I'm going to, for this palette, I'm going to take out, I'm going to put all the mint in, and I'm going to put some blue in there, and some red, and that's the colour I want here, and I'm going to store that as a palette there. Yes, done. Okay, well, play back those palettes. We can see it gives me the values exactly as I want. But now I'm going to take out these attributes, clear the programmer, and I'm going to run my queue. And my queue looks very different to what I just had in those palettes. The reason being is that when I recorded the queue, I only used RGB, and it was only RGB in the palette, I should say. The other attributes were there, but they weren't in the palette. And the example there, if I went from the Nexus panels, which is just RGB, and I now add more attributes to a palette by morphing and then updating, what you need to be aware of is it doesn't automatically, just because I've added more attributes to a palette, so in my case here, Nexus panels here, I added attributes to a palette, just because I added them to the palette, it doesn't automatically kick them through to the queue. That's where something called expanding palettes comes in. What we do with expanding palettes is we now say if you've added new attributes to a palette, kick them through to any queues that are linked to it. And as always, hold shift down, expand all palettes, expand all color palettes into the right queues. And now, there we go, that looks exactly like I recorded it in those queues now. So I get the right information in my queues as I want now. Okay, so there you go. If I go and view the queue, you can see it's kicked through red, green, blue, amber, mint, etc. into the right place now. Okay, there you go. So 1, 2, there you go. The right information in there. Cool. Another one I want to mention there is not just expand palette, but we have replacing palettes. This came in a little while back. The whole idea that, okay, I've got this queue here, which is linked to, if I go back to simple view, is linked to color palette 51. You can replace a palette in a queue without having to actually go and re-record or merge or something like that. So the idea being is I can say here, I've got my palette, was it 51? I can do replace palette. So I could say replace palette 51 with palette 52, and I can now press enter to say just do it everywhere on the console, or I could say actually just do it in this queue stack only. And now when I've done that, you'll see it's now replaced 51 for 52. I have a quick way of replacing palettes within a queue stack. Looking at the questions there, Mario, is it possible to relink a palette? The only way of relinking a palette, if you I guess you're talking about if you've broken the link within a pallet itself. So when you have a linked pallet and you unlink it, no, it's not possible to do that without actually re-recording and re-recording the link there yourself. So yeah, do be careful if you use the unlink button. Of course, undo should work on that as well, so you should be able to undo that. Okay, so we talked about linked pallets, we've talked about expanding pallets, we've talked about replacing pallets. Final one just to mention on with pallets that sometimes gets forgotten, in fact 2 more things, is one, don't forget you do have intensity pallets, something that's forgotten there in the pallets window here. You do have intensity pallets which can be used, and timing. Timing often comes up when we talk about pallets. Do we store timing into pallets? No, currently we don't store any time into pallets, but of course do remember when you're recalling pallets, any time that's in the programmer does come into your queues as well. So if you're making use of things like regions, this execute page has got a little bit destroyed, but here we go, we've got some color palettes here. If I made use of regions in an execute window and I have timing buttons in here, so if I have something like assign special timing and a 2-second button, and I said the spots go red over 2 seconds, if I turn the spots on, there we go, and I happen to store that in a queue, that 2 seconds apply time would get stored into the queue. The same again for any times and offsets you apply a pallet with get stored into queues as well, even if you're in chase timing. Okay, so if I said 3 star and pick on a pallet, it would apply it left to right, and I'm going to store that as a queue done. Okay, and there are a whole lot of different syntaxes and shortcuts you'll find for applying pallets. For example, 5 star slash, click on a pallet, we'll do an inverse apply, record there, done. If I said 4 star minus, we'll do a center out, record done. Now you notice I'm using different times here. I'm going to say 8 seconds star plus, and that will go center in, store there. And if I do a random 5 star dot, and let's go magenta, we'll do a random apply the pallet, store that here, clear off my programmer, run up that queue stack. It's a chase, so actually the transition between all of my queues is the same. It's just using the fact that I use some offset. I did a star minus, star plus, etc. there. It's using that as the offset, but the time is actually coming from the chase itself. So I haven't got different times between the queues because I've got a speed time here set by the chase, 1.8 seconds. But if I was to convert this into queue timing and go and run through the queue, it now will respect the time that I applied the pallet and play that back. So do be aware of that. If you apply a pallet with time or with offset and you record a queue, it becomes actually a really quick way of building up a complex looking queue rather than me having to come in after the fact and go to view queue, view times, and start adding times in here. Now you can enter the times in that format here. So when I'm applying a pallet with an offset time, you can see it's worked out a delay and a fade here. You can come and use the same shortcuts, 3 star minus, etc. when you're entering times in this view times window as well. That does absolutely work. Okay. There you go. You guys have been really quiet on the chat today. Maybe it's because I disappointed you and not talking about Media Master. So there you go. There's a couple of little tricks with pallets. Hopefully a little reminder for some people. As I said, next week we definitely will be talking about Media Master. Watch this space. We'll be announcing it on socials tomorrow when we get Media Master 26 beta out the door. Would love to hear your feedback on that as well. So please do, once it's downloaded, do comment on our social page. Let us know what you think of Media Master, and if there's specific topics you want us to cover on Training Tuesday next week with Media Master, let us know as well.